this talk. Hopefully it'll start us off on a good note. Actually, it's been a while since I've actually spoken English and done a presentation, even though English is my native language. But we're gonna see how things go today. So, in the world, there are about 7.5 billion people, and of that 7.5 billion, there are about 1 billion, or 15%, that, according to the World Health Organization, have some sort of disability. In the United States, 1 in 22,000 females have Rett syndrome. Now, what is Rett syndrome? It's a neurological disorder that affects impairment. Oftentimes, you lose the ability to speak, loss of motor and cognitive development, and in females, it's 1 in 22,000, at least in the States. But I want to introduce all of you to my cousin, Caleb. He's 15 years old. He comes from Canada, great country. He is a normal boy. He loves video games, reading, bothering his siblings. He loves it all. He loves to eat. He's a typical, normal 15-year-old teenager. He does have Rett syndrome. At the time of his diagnosis, he was one of 7 boys in the world to have this disease. The life expectancy on average is to about 40 years old, and in boys it's a lot less. But he's 15, he's healthy, he's doing well. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to see him. They came down from Canada and visited my parents in Utah. And this is really, for me, when I started to fall in love with inclusive design. Why? I had always heard that technology could be used for good, but when I saw Caleb being able to talk, thanks to a GoFundMe that his parents created, he was able to talk through a computer, Toby 2, and he was able to express sentences without having to lift a finger. That, to me, is amazing and incredible. That's designing for difference, in my opinion. And from that point on, being able to see him express when he needed to go to the restroom, or he was hungry, or his brothers were just annoying him and he wanted to be left alone. Technology can be very powerful. And so from then, I've taken it kind of upon myself to, as much as I can. I mean, in my work at Hantho, I primarily deal with fintech clients and hotel chains like Melia. But at the same time, I start to think about any opportunity that I have to design inclusively and design for difference, I try to do my best. So, as a UX designer, and oftentimes we talk about human-centered design, designing for users, designing for humans. And I like this quote by Kat Holmes, who she was responsible for creating the inclusive design department at Microsoft, the design practice. And now she's the director of UX design at Google. And what she said is the problem with human-centered design is that no one says which human needs to be at the center. So we talk a lot about humans, we don't know, what is that, who is it really that we're designing for, right? That question that was in the video. We talk oftentimes about a bell curve when we're talking about inclusive design, where we have those edge cases, and then in the middle there's quote-unquote the average. But what is that average? I graduated, I got my master's degree in interaction design at Elisava here in Barcelona. And as I entered the world of design, my background's in communications, I often heard design can change the world. You know, designers will change the world. And I certainly feel that's the case. I don't want to downplay my work. But at the same time, there are so many real problems out there that have to do with inclusive design, and not just disabilities, right? Inclusive design, I'm not going to talk about a particular definition, but in my personal opinion, inclusive design is everything, right? The languages. Here we speak, I speak English, Spanish, and I'm una mica de català. So we have all these different languages here, and that makes us unique. Different religions, different backgrounds, different genders. It's much more than just disability, right? So we need to keep that. We need to keep that in mind. Now, when we're trying to design for all, it's a big feat. You know, there's all these big problems: world hunger, gender parity, a lot of these things that we have technically been trying to create solutions for years, for decades. And hopefully we'll be able to solve some of these big, real issues soon, but it'll take time. So what I want to focus on today is 3 challenges that I feel currently exist and will continue to exist as technology advances in the near future, and what we can do about it today, tomorrow, and even this week, this coming week, because it's the weekend, right? So after this, we'll take a break. But when you try to design for all, challenges will inevitably arise. So what are the few challenges that I want to focus on for the course of my talk? Number 1, bias. Number 2, failing fast. And number 3, changing futures. So first, bias. So I want all of you to take a look at this image here. I mean, you have 4 screens to look at, so choose your screen you want to look at. But shout out, how many triangles do you see here? A number. 2, I hear 2. 5. Any other numbers? 8. Okay. Great. Actually, the answer is none. There is not one triangle in that image, right? Our mind is connecting those lines and creating, and we envision those triangles. The same as with bias. We oftentimes feel like we may not have biases, but we paint the world a certain way. Everyone sees the world differently. So how do we design for difference? Now, who is behind? We live in a time of great technological advance. We have things like Microsoft HoloLens, Magic Leaps 1, Google Home, chatbots, artificial intelligence, machine learning. But who is behind the design of all of these great things? Unfortunately, and I kind of fit this stereotype, which is really bad, but a white male in Silicon Valley speaks English, very affluent, I'm not very affluent, but it's unfortunately the stereotype. Now, women are making great strides in tech, and more women should be in tech, but that's another conversation for another day. And I'm not the one who should be talking about that topic either. However, unfortunately, when you get a bunch of these white men in a room in Silicon Valley designing for difference, what tends to happen? Biases make their way into the picture. Something that's really interesting when you think about voice assistants, for example, right? You think about Alexa, think about Cortana, think about Google Assistant. Voice usually, by default, is a female voice. I was watching a video, and I showed this to my class. I have some of my students here from Barcelona Technology School. Showed this from Wall Street Journal, did a report on, a short little video on this. And how you can actually change the gender of the voice assistant on your phone. And when the reporter changed Siri's voice to a male's voice, threw her off, right? Because she didn't know that she could do that. But when we're designing products, it's important to consider who is on the team that's designing that product, because biases will inherently be reflected in the designs that we do. So what can we do? Well, we need to ask ourselves who our circles are. Who are we constantly spending our time with, right? As we go on social media, who is it that is influencing all of our feeds? So whether they're on the left politically or on the right or somewhere in the middle, who are those that we're constantly interacting with? Also, could we give some of that time that we're using to other groups and try to bring in more diversity? Also, it's important to consider bias at every level. It's important to think about C-level, whether women and men are getting paid the same, but it's also equally as important for the working mother of 4 lower down the chain as well. So we need to think about bias not only at the top, but everywhere, right? We need to see bias and diversity also as an economic issue. If I remember correctly, one of the stats is that African Americans and Latino, white professionals, gain 12 times more on average than African Americans and Latinos in terms of salary. We need to create dialogue for change. We need to have those tough discussions, right? It's hard to do so, but we need to program diversity and inclusion activities, initiatives as a part of our company and our day-to-day. And we need to foster a gratitude practice, be grateful for what we have and our differences. Failing fast. How many of you have heard of failing fast, right? It's kind of the main crux of any of the design thinking methodologies, Scrum. You need to fail fast so you can launch to market, and I think that's great. But I also think it's a challenge for us as designers, especially when we're trying to design for a more inclusive world. Why? You Google design thinking, and this is one of many pictures that will come up. Every company will tend to change these titles and call it something different and be pioneering in the way that they do design thinking, but at the end of the day, it's about empathy, it's about defining, it's about prototyping. And you see that it's cyclical, right? It's cyclical. So you're in this constant movement of reiterating, changing, pivoting, changing based on what your users are saying, which is great. But why do I personally see it as a challenge for us, especially when we're designing for difference, is one, I feel like it ends up hurting our business. Because, one, you're not ready. So oftentimes when you fail fast, it's oftentimes because you just haven't dedicated enough time to something. And you're not ready to launch it to market, you're not ready. And then that kind of ties into the second point that I want to make, is you lower expectations. If you simply say that, okay, I'm going to fail fast, great. And then someone says, you really missed the mark. Completely missed the mark. People do, and I'm speaking from experience, right? Oh, well, I'm failing fast, right? It's okay. I can use that as a cop-out. Especially in the world of accessibility and universal design, when you cut corners, this tends to be, unfortunately, an excuse. And then lastly, you fail in the wrong things. So, how many of you want to change your entire company every single day by failing fast, right? We tend to focus on things that we shouldn't fail at. We need to focus on the smaller things. We need to focus on the things that really matter, things we don't know, and explore those. So instead of failing fast, we should learn fast, right? Learn from our mistakes. And how do we do that? We need to build our listening infrastructure. What do I mean by listening infrastructure? Well, as a company, we have certain channels. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be social media, but we have certain ways, certain channels that we use to listen to our customers. It might be inviting individuals in for user testing. It might be customer tech support. Twitter. We need to first start by writing down a list of all of those different points, those different listening points that we gather information from. We need to look at the list and see where the gaps lie, because inevitably there will be gaps. What other listening sources could you potentially begin to listen to? And then you also need to seek out the negative. I consider myself to be a very positive person, at least I try. But you need to recognize the negative, right? There are going to, unfortunately, be detractors who maybe you might not get along with everyone, right? But you need to recognize the detractors, especially from an inclusive and a diversity perspective. You need to recognize them, and how do you solve that? How do you work with them? Inclusion. What we're here talking about today, designing for difference. And so you need to, have the tools so they can feel like they can participate, that they can feel motivated. I mean, it's not just enough to have a toolkit. There are millions of toolkits that talk about inclusion. So we need to do that. We need to replace debate with action. Sometimes we get in this constant cycle of analyzing and making sure it's perfect, and we need to just really act and just go to our customers, talk to our users. That's nothing new. They will be our North Star at the end of the day. Changing futures. Will we be able to keep up? Right? It seems like every other day, especially when I was just starting UX, and I was learning. I mean, I focus on UX research, but I was trying to learn all these tools, right? So I start with Sketch. I start with all of these different design tools. Help me be a better UX designer and be able to design interfaces. But it seems to me like in the course of my master's, I saw several versions of Sketch launched. I saw a new program come out that claimed to be the best and build off of InVision, build off of whatever. But the future is changing. And our needs are changing, and disabilities and things tend to evolve. So we need to prepare for that constant change. And that's a challenge in and of itself. So I assume there are very few people here from the United States, so I add a little bit of context. Blockbuster, back in the 90s, was a store where you could rent movies, right? You could rent video games, you could rent movies, and it would come in this really, as we say here in Spain, cutre, in a very ugly-looking box, right? And then you'd get your DVD, and you'd have it for 3 to 5 days. Wonderful. You'd watch the video, and if you would forget to return it, there would be late fees and start to build and accrue, right? Until you would have to either A, say that you lost it and just never go back to the store, or pay those fees. Blockbuster really dominated the market for years. Dominated the market. They were really pioneers in being able to rent DVDs. But they died. And they no longer exist. Why? Because Netflix and Hulu and other services entered the picture. There are many reasons for the failure of Blockbuster, and I'm not going to go for long on that, but the main reason is pride. Netflix actually came to them saying, hey, we'll buy you out for $50 million. And they said, no. We're confident in our model. If we have a bad day, we'll just increase our ad spend, and we'll be fine. Well, they no longer exist. So we need to be able to adapt, and that's something that I think everyone knows, but we need to be willing to adapt. We need to dedicate resources to spotting trends. There are even actually individuals and companies who have the title of futurist. I think it's futurist, but that they are dedicated to looking for those trends, right? And trying to anticipate where the future is heading and what that means. We need to assist and go to industry events like this. This is a great way to learn about what's happening in the future and to meet with other like-minded professionals. We need to, if you're a larger organization and you have the budget, be able to consider creating a research and development team. That's what they do. You can't just focus on design. We're all here, inclusive design, designing for the difference. I think we all agree that it's a positive thing. But at the end of the day, we can't just go back to our stakeholders and say, oh, inclusion design is great, we should do it. Yes. No, we need to be able to tie back to business schools, right? We need to be able to put numbers as much as we can. It's tricky, but we need to do it. We can't predict the future. We need to have a plan. And diversity really is key. There's a recent report by McKinsey that says the most successful companies actually are the most diverse. And I believe that as well. More perspectives, the better. We need to, just the more perspectives that we bring onto the team, the better that we can do to predict the future. So there are inevitably challenges ahead of us. It's exciting. I'm excited about it. And we need to think about my cousin. We need to think about Paula, right, who has Rett syndrome. We need to try to eliminate bias as much as we can by creating a dialogue and a space where we feel comfortable. We need to address bias at every level. We need to recognize those assumptions that we make and the people that we associate with. We need to also not fail fast, but learn fast, right? We need to be aware that what is it that we're really trying to solve? And lastly, we need to, like I mentioned, we need to be prepared for changing futures. And whether it's someone else, inclusive design is the key. And Andrea Wong, in closing, said, for every single one of us, we will have accessibility needs at some point throughout our lifetime. So even if it's not today, you may have a disability down the road. So consider that, and best of luck as you design for difference. Thank you.